My dad sent me a message last Tuesday. Just one sentence. No greeting, no explanation. It said, "But don't come back." I read it 3 times. Once out of shock, twice out of habit. I didn't cry. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I didn't even feel angry. I just stared at my phone like maybe it would change if I waited long enough. It didn't. I sat down at the kitchen table. The air felt heavy, not dramatic, just thick, like it was harder to exist in. My toast had gone cold. I bit into it anyway. Crunchy at the edges, dry in the middle. I didn't taste anything. I kept chewing. Then I put my phone face down, folded my hands, and stared at the wall. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Something in me already had. And whatever it wasn't coming back either. He didn't even bother with punctuation. Just a "don't come back." No period. No signature. Just the kind of sentence that slams a door you didn't even know was still open. I stared at it, trying to figure out what Tony meant. Was it cold? Final? Angry? Tired? The truth is, it didn't matter. It could have been a whisper or a scream. It still meant the same thing. I was done. Not just cut off. Erased. There wasn't even a trace of the man who used to carry me on his shoulders when I was 5. Just this flat 8-letter sentence. It felt like someone had pressed delete on a whole relationship and forgot to leave a backup. I kept rereading it, like the message might glitch and reveal a different ending, something softer, something human. But it didn't. It stayed cruel, simple, and somehow worse than if he'd said nothing at all. I thought I'd cry or scream, or at least feel something sharp, but I didn't. It was just quiet, like the moment after a car crash when everything's still moving, but your brain hasn't caught up. My body felt hollow, like I was made of cardboard. I got up, poured another cup of coffee, burned my tongue, didn't flinch. I rinsed the cup, put it back where it belonged, sat down again. Yes, this. I remember wondering if this was shock, but it didn't feel like shock. It felt like recognition. Like part of me already knew this was coming, and the rest of me had been rehearsing for it all along. There were no tears, not even the urge, just a weird kind of stillness. Like my heart had switched to airplane mode. I didn't check my phone again. There was nothing else to say. He said it all in 4 words, and I heard him loud and clear. There was a time when I thought he hung the stars. I used to wait by the window for his car to pull into the driveway, counting how many steps it took him to reach the porch. He'd tap the glass with 2 fingers, always the same rhythm, like a secret code just for me. I'd run to the door, and he'd scoop me up like I weighed nothing. Back then, he was more than a dad. He was safety. He was the voice that read me bedtime stories, the arms that lifted me onto his shoulders at the fair, the person who made me believe nothing could hurt me if I just stayed close. I didn't notice the shift when it started. One day he just stopped tapping the window, then he stopped reading, then he stopped looking up when I walked into the room. By the time I realized it, I was already knocking on a door he'd locked from the inside. It started after Mom died, not all at once. Grief doesn't do that. It sneaks in quiet and slow like rot under paint. At first he was just quieter. He didn't hum while washing dishes, didn't ask about school, just sat in his chair, staring at the TV even when it was off. I thought he was sad. I was too. I figured we'd get through it together. But he didn't reach for me. He reached for work, for beer, for anything that didn't remind him of her. And I kept showing up, making his coffee, leaving notes on the fridge, pretending that silence was just another way of saying, "I love you." But the silence grew, stretched, hardened, until it became a wall I couldn't climb. He stopped being a dadaist and turned into a shadow wearing his clothes. I kept trying to follow him through the dark. I didn't know he'd already decided to walk alone. I don't think he meant to make me feel like a burden. But he did. In the way his shoulders tensed when I spoke, in how his eyes skimmed past me like I was static in the room. I learned to talk less, to step softer, to clean up before he noticed the mess. I got good at disappearing without leaving. That maybe, if I was quiet enough, useful enough, he'd look at me the way he used to. But the looks never came back, and I mistook his silence for my failure. I grew up learning how not to take up space. I tried everything, got good grades, helped around the house, stayed home on weekends just in case he needed something. Yeah, I figured if I kept checking the right boxes, eventually he'd notice. Eventually I'd be enough. But no matter what I did, it never seemed to land. He'd nod, maybe, say good, without looking up, and then go back to whatever he was doing, like I hadn't even spoken. I started volunteering for chores he didn't ask for, cooked dinner by 13, paid part of the bills by 16. I thought love was a prize, and maybe I just hadn't earned it yet. But deep down, I think I knew he wasn't keeping score. He just wasn't playing the game. I wasn't waiting to be seen anymore. I was waiting to stop trying because the hardest part wasn't being invisible. Ski. It was realizing you were only visible when you were useful. There was this one day, family reunion, summer, too hot for anyone to be smiling that much. They were taking a group photo in the backyard. I remember standing on the porch, holding a paper plate, watching everyone gather under the big oak tree. My stepmom waved. I thought she was calling me over. I smiled, took a step forward, but then she turned to someone else. The camera clicked. I stood there with baked beans dripping onto my shoes. No one noticed, not even Dad. Later, I asked if they took another one with me. He said, "You must have been off somewhere." That's what I became, off somewhere. Not forgotten, not remembered, just absent by default. I think that was the day I stopped asking to be included. Not out of rebellion, out of instinct, because some silences aren't gaps, they're answers. In that photo, it's still framed in his hallway, still missing me, still perfect. Something shifted that night, not suddenly, just finally. I wasn't sad, I wasn't angry, I was just done. The kind of done that doesn't come with closure or some big confrontation. The kind that seeps in quietly like rain through a crack in the ceiling. I sat on my bed with the lights off, phone in hand, rereading his message for the last time. Don't come back. Okay. I whispered it out loud. Just that, okay, and I meant it. Not as surrender, not as defeat, as release. I wasn't going to fight for a place I'd never been welcome. Not anymore. I didn't delete the message. I didn't respond. I just let it sit there like an old scar. Proof that I tried, and that I knew when to stop trying. That was the real shift, not breaking down, but choosing not to break at all. I typed one word, okay, no period. No period, no follow-up, no explanation. Just that, I looked at it for a moment before hitting send. It didn't feel small, it felt final. Like closing a door that had been half open for years, letting the click of the latch say everything I never could. No begging, no guilt, no anger wrapped in sarcasm. Just a quiet confirmation that I understood, and that I wouldn't make him repeat himself. That word, okay, wasn't acceptance. It was acknowledgement of the years I spent trying, of the silence I swallowed, of the truth I finally stopped running from. He didn't reply. I didn't expect him to. That's the thing about some endings. They don't echo. They just land. I put the phone down, sat back, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. I stood by the window after that. The street outside was empty. No cars, no wind. Just the soft hum of a world that had kept spinning without me. I wasn't crying. I wasn't smiling either, but something inside me had gone quiet in a different way. Not the kind of quiet that hurts. The kind that waits. For what, I didn't know. I watched the streetlight flicker, listened to the ticking of the clock in the hallway, and realized this was it. Not freedom in the loud, dramatic sense, but in the stillness of no longer asking for permission, of no longer rehearsing words that would never be heard. So, for the first time, I wasn't planning how to fix it. I was just here, alone but not abandoned, discarded but not broken. I looked out into the dark and thought, maybe this is what starting over sounds like. Then I used to think if I was good enough, the world would open up to me. So I followed every rule, turned in every assignment early, raised my hand only when I was sure I had the right answer. My teacher smiled, called me mature for my age. But other kids didn't. They rolled their eyes when I spoke, whispered that I was trying too hard. One time in 7th grade, I got detention, not for breaking rules, but because a girl said I made her feel stupid by finishing a test too fast. The teacher didn't even ask my side. Just told me to be more aware of how I made others feel. I remember sitting in that empty classroom after school, staring at the clock, realizing something twisted. Being good didn't make you safe. Sometimes it just made you a target. And I was getting really good at being easy to hurt. And whenever something went wrong at home, it was always my fault. Dishes left unwashed. Alana, why didn't you help your stepmother? Violet failing a class. Maybe she's distracted because of how tense things are with you. I used to try to explain, gently, respectfully, Dad, that's not what happened. But he'd cut me off with a sigh, eyes already glazing over. Don't start. That was his favorite phrase. I stopped starting. I stopped speaking. And my stepmom knew this power well. She'd twist moments into stories, and he'd believe her every time. Once Violet borrowed a dress of mine without asking and spilled juice on it. I brought it up quietly. The response? Stop being so dramatic. It's just a dress. But when Violet accused me of taking her charger, I had to sit through a whole dinner of silent glares. The truth didn't matter in that house. Only who got to tell it first. There was a dinner party once. I was 10. My dad had just gotten a promotion, and my stepmom insisted on hosting some coworkers. She gave Violet a new dress, curled her hair, told her she was the princess of the night. Me? I wore the same navy blue skirt I always did, and she told me not to speak unless spoken to. I tried to help set the table, folded the napkins into little fans like I'd seen in a book, but I dropped a fork. It clattered loud, and everyone turned. My stepmom laughed. She's a little clumsy, she said, as if I wasn't there. Someone made a joke. I smiled, hoping it would pass. But later, when I brought out dessert, she said, maybe next time you don't touch anything, okay? Everyone laughed again, except me. I just nodded. That night, I learned how to disappear while still being in the room. It's spent 2 weeks making that gift. Violet had started drawing, so I saved up my allowance to buy her a sketchbook. The kind with thick pages, spiral bound, with a little pouch for pencils. I even wrote her name on the first page in gold ink. Happy birthday. Keep creating. I left it on her bed the night before, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. She didn't mention it the next morning. No, thank you. Not even a glance my way. That evening, I walked past the laundry room and saw the sketchbook in the trash. Not torn, not ruined, just discarded, like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. I stood there for a long time staring at it. Then I turned off the light and walked back to my room. That was the last time I gave her something without being asked, or hoped it might mean something. College was supposed to be a fresh start. A place where no one knew the roles I'd been assigned at home. I thought maybe finally I could just be me. But somehow the script followed me. I joined clubs, sat in front rows, offered to help with projects. People smiled, but they didn't stay. Group texts left me out. Conversations paused when I walked into a room. Once I baked cookies for my dorm floor. A girl took one, bit into it, and said, "Oh, you're one of those try-hard girls, huh?" I laughed like it didn't sting. I always laughed. Over time, I stopped showing up early, stopped raising my hand. I kept my dorm clean, my head down, my mouth shut. No one hated me, but no one saw me either. Tanforvi. It felt familiar, like home, just with different walls. I was still the outsider, just better at pretending I didn't mind. After a while, I stopped expecting yes. I'd hear, "We'll let you know," and already feel the no forming behind it. Rejection wasn't a shock anymore. It was routine, like brushing my teeth or locking the door. I applied for internships and got polite emails back. We went with another candidate. Asked a professor for a recommendation. He said he was too swamped. Even the friendships I tried to build felt like one-way doors. I'd listen for hours, remember birthdays, show up when they needed someone, but when I needed a ride or just someone to sit with at lunch, they were busy. Always busy. I used to think I was unlucky. Then I wondered if I was just too much, or not enough, or both. I started pre-rejecting myself, not applying, not reaching out. If you never ask, they can't say no. And that kind of silence, it almost feels like safety. He was kind at first, said I had a calming presence, said I listened better than anyone else. I thought maybe this was it, someone who finally saw me. I didn't notice the pattern until much later, how he only called when he needed something. How I always apologized first, even when I hadn't done anything wrong. When he snapped, I soothed. When he pulled away, I leaned in harder. One night I asked if he could meet my friends. He laughed. "We don't need labels, Lana. Don't ruin this." I nodded even though my stomach dropped. It felt like home again, walking on eggshells, shrinking myself so he'd stay. I told myself it was love. But really, it was muscle memory. I was just reenacting the same story I grew up with, hoping that if I played it perfectly this time, maybe the ending would finally be different. It wasn't. She was the one person I trusted, my writing professor. She said I had a voice that needed to be heard, that my essays held a kind of quiet fire. Cut to there. I started to believe her. I shared things in that classroom I'd never said out loud. She encouraged me to apply for a fellowship. A big one. I gave her drafts. She gave me feedback. And then one day, she stopped replying. I found out why 2 weeks later at a campus event. Another student won the fellowship. He thanked her in his speech, quoted one of my lines word for word. My breath caught. She smiled from her seat like it was nothing. I walked home in the rain that night, not because it was poetic, just because I didn't want anyone to see my face. That was the night I stopped writing for months. Some betrayals don't echo, they go silent. One morning, I caught my reflection brushing my teeth. And for a second, I didn't recognize the girl staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she looked unfinished, like someone waiting to be given a role. That day, I skipped class, sat in a coffee shop and wrote in a notebook I'd been ignoring. A list, not of dreams, but of patterns, all the ways I'd tried to be useful, invisible, agreeable. I saw it clearly for the first time. I wasn't living a life. I was following a script written by everyone else. Be quiet. Be helpful. Don't make waves. I kept reading my own story like I wasn't the one holding the pen. And that realization didn't feel freeing. It felt exhausting because now I couldn't pretend I didn't see it. And once you see the cage, staying inside it starts to hurt more than leaving ever could. One morning, I caught my reflection brushing my teeth. And for a second, I didn't recognize the girl staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she looked different, unfinished. Like someone waiting to be given a role. That day, I skipped class. Sat in a coffee shop and wrote in a notebook I'd been ignoring. Not of dreams, but of patterns, all the ways I'd tried to be useful, invisible, agreeable. I saw it clearly for the first time. I wasn't living a life. I was following a script written by everyone else. Be quiet, be helpful. Don't make waves. I kept reading my own story like I wasn't the one holding the pen. And that realization didn't feel freeing. It felt exhausting because now I couldn't pretend I didn't see it. And once you see the cage, staying inside it starts to hurt more than leaving ever could. The first few days felt like standing in a hallway after the door shuts, not slammed, just quietly, finally closed. I woke up without any buzzing phone, no calendar reminders, no voice in my head, rehearsing how to be enough for anyone else. And it was weird, like forgetting how to walk without someone watching. I'd make breakfast and catch myself setting the table for more than just me. I'd reach for my phone to scroll through faces that never really saw me, then stop. The silence wasn't loud, it was hollow. But it wasn't empty, it was a blank page. And for someone who had spent her whole life trying to be written into other people's stories, that blankness was unsettling, but also, maybe, just maybe, sacred. For the first time, no one was there to approve or disapprove. I existed, unedited. The apartment wasn't special. It had peeling paint near the window, and the fridge hummed too loud at night. But it was mine. No one had ever visited me there. No one knew the address. I could walk in without rehearsing a smile or bracing for small talk. The neighbors didn't ask questions. They nodded politely, called me a miss or nothing at all. And that anonymity, it was a gift. For once, I wasn't someone's daughter or sister or shame. I was just a woman who lived in Unit 3B. I filled the closet with clothes I actually liked, not ones gifted out of guilt or chosen to appease someone else. I stocked the kitchen with foods no one judged me for. Every inch of that space whispered, "You don't have to be anyone else here." And that whisper was enough to start healing. I didn't sit down to write something profound. I wasn't trying to end one night after washing dishes and folding laundry in silence. I opened a blank document, not to publish, just to unload. The words didn't come in order. They weren't pretty. Some sentences stopped halfway. But they were mine. I wrote about moments I hadn't dared to say out loud, the tiny humiliations, the invisible wounds, the way it felt to be erased with a smile. There was no audience, no applause, no performance, just me putting puzzle pieces back where they'd been scattered. I didn't edit, didn't delete, and when I reread what I'd poured out, I didn't cringe. I exhaled, not because the pain vanished, but because I'd finally stopped swallowing it whole. Writing didn't fix anything, but it helped me name what broke. And that was a start. I didn't even title it. Just save the file as a Tuesday. It wasn't long, maybe 3 paragraphs. I wrote about the way my coffee tasted different when no one was watching me drink it. Forgot what year things happened. Lost track of time halfway through, but no one interrupted. No one looked away. I told them about the betrayal, yes, but also about the long silence afterward, about what it felt like to be erased, to not be believed, to not be believed, to watch someone else wear your life like a costume and still be applauded. My hands trembled, but I kept talking, because every time I wanted to stop, I saw someone leaning forward. Not with curiosity, but with recognition. They didn't want perfection. They wanted the truth. Truth. And for the first time in a long time, I was the one giving it. When I finished, there was no applause, just a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. A man near the back nodded slowly, like he'd been holding something in for years. No one asked for details. No one wanted names or timelines or proof. They weren't there for gossip. They were there because something in my story mirrored something in theirs, and somehow that made it less lonely. A younger girl approached me after. She didn't say much, just whispered a thank you and squeezed my hand. I didn't know her name. I still don't. But in that moment, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't invisible anymore, not because I'd made noise, but because I'd let my silence speak. And they had heard it, not with their ears, but with their hearts. I didn't dress like a speaker. I didn't rehearse like one either. I just wore what felt comfortable and spoke like I was telling a friend. No metaphors. No metaphors. No dramatic build-ups. I didn't try to make it powerful. I didn't try to teach a lesson. I just said what happened, what it felt like to be betrayed by blood, to lose everything, and to rebuild from a place so quiet no one noticed. I didn't polish the pain, and I didn't package it as strength. I let it be messy, honest, and maybe that's why it worked. Because it didn't sound like a story someone crafted. It sounded like something someone survived. I wasn't standing on a stage to be admired. I was just standing. And that, somehow, was enough. The next week, my inbox filled up, invitations to speak on podcasts, panels about resilience. Emails with subject lines like "Your story changed me." I stared at them for hours, unsure if I was supposed to feel honored or exposed. Some offers came with money, others with promises of bigger platforms. But I didn't say yes to all of them. In fact, I barely said yes to any. I wasn't trying to turn this into something. I wasn't building a brand. I was still healing, and I knew how easy it would be to let other people shape my story into something it wasn't. So I answered slowly, carefully. If it felt like someone was trying to use my pain to sell hope, I let the message sit unread. But if it felt like someone really heard me, like they saw more than the headline, I wrote back. There was a time when my silence felt like a failure. Like I didn't fight hard enough, didn't scream loud enough, didn't prove my worth. But now, sitting alone after the talk, reading messages from strangers who'd felt something shift in them, I saw it differently. My silence wasn't weakness. It was how I survived. It was what protected me when the truth would have been twisted, when every word could have been used against me. I realized I didn't need to explain what happened anymore. The people who needed to understand already did. And the ones who didn't, well, I didn't owe them anything. For the first time, I looked at my own quiet not as a scar, but as a shelter. It hadn't kept me small. It had kept me safe. And maybe that's why I was still standing. I wasn't viral. I wasn't trending. But something strange was happening. A ripple. Quiet, but steady. People began quoting lines I didn't even remember writing. They shared my words in private groups, slid them into conversations, whispered them to friends, not for attention, but because they recognized themselves in them. I wasn't preaching. I wasn't selling. I was just existing, fully, finally, without shame. And somehow, that was enough to echo. Not in stadiums or headlines, but in quiet kitchens, therapy rooms, midnight texts between friends who needed the words but didn't have them. My silence had grown roots. And those roots were finding their way into places I'd never imagined. It didn't roar, it hummed. And in that hum, something sacred was carried, proof that survival didn't need applause to be real. Her message came late, 2:13 a.m. The subject line was blank, just her name and a few shaky sentences. "I've never told anyone this," she wrote. But your story made me feel like maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe I'm not alone." She didn't go into details. She didn't have to. I knew that language the way you write when you're still afraid someone might be reading over your shoulder. Still trying to believe your pain counts. I read it 3 times, then just sat there, hands on the keyboard, unsure how to answer something so fragile. She wasn't asking for advice. She wasn't asking for anything. She just wanted to be seen. And somehow, through the quiet space between us, I saw her be, and say okay, fully, like someone had once done for me without demanding a full explanation. Just, I hear you. It was enough. I didn't react the way I thought I would. No tears, no triumphant music playing in my head. I just sat there, rereading her words until they blurred a little. It wasn't the kind of message that fixed anything, but it softened something sharp inside me, like a knot that didn't loosen all the way, but stopped pulling so tight. I wasn't used to being the one someone reached for in the dark. I'd spent so long being the one in the dark. But now, here I was holding a thread, not a rope, not a rescue, just a thread of connection between 2 strangers who understood something raw and unspoken. I didn't know her face, her voice, or her full story, but I knew her silence. And for the first time in a long time, mine didn't feel so heavy. I used to think I had to scream to be heard, that justice needed noise, that healing had to be loud enough to drown out the pain. But now I knew better. There was a different kind of strength, one that didn't perform, didn't announce itself, didn't demand recognition, the kind that just stayed. Present, grounded, unshaken. I didn't need to argue with my past anymore. I didn't need to prove how much it hurt. The silence I carried wasn't a wound now. It was a choice, a boundary, a knowing. I could walk into a room and say nothing and still be whole, still be loud in ways that mattered. Said. That's what I wanted to leave behind. Not a roar, but a quiet certainty, a presence that said, I'm still here. And somehow that was enough to change everything. The phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen. No name, just a number I hadn't seen in years, but somehow still remembered. I let it ring. I didn't touch it. I didn't move. I just watched the seconds count down like it was someone else's call, not mine. My heart didn't race. It sank. And not from fear, but from recognition. That familiar ache that used to twist inside me every time I hoped he'd choose me. He didn't leave a voicemail, just silence. But even that felt louder than it should. I stood there for a while, the quiet wrapping around me like a fog. Then the phone lit up again. Same number, same silence. I turned it face down this time. I wasn't ready. Or maybe I just didn't want to pretend to care when I didn't know if I still did. There was a time when I would have dropped everything to hear his voice. Now I didn't even flinch. The next morning, there was a voicemail. I didn't want to listen. I didn't want to listen. But my thumb hovered over the play button like it had a mind of its own. Then curiosity won. His voice cracked through the speaker. Older, thinner, almost uncertain. I don't know if this number still works. A pause, a breath. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. If you never want to talk to me again, I get it. I deserve that. But if you do, I'd really like to see you. I stood there in my kitchen, the toaster humming, the coffee machine dripping, while his voice filled the room with a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. Not the silence of being ignored. The silence of someone finally reaching out with nothing left to hide behind. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry either. Just tired. Like I'd been waiting for an apology I didn't even know I needed. And now that it came, it didn't land. Maybe it was too late. Or maybe too much had already been said without ever being said. I stared at the phone for a long time after the voicemail ended. I didn't replay it. I didn't save it. I didn't even respond. I just hit delete, not out of spite, not even out of anger. It just felt done. Like that version of me, the girl who used to crave his approval, had quietly left the room years ago, and I didn't notice until now. I watched the screen go dark again, taking his voice with it. No fanfare. No drama. No drama. Just one tap and it was gone. I thought deleting it would feel cruel, but it didn't. It felt clean, final, like closing a window before a storm you've already lived through. He might call again, he might not. But either way, I wasn't holding my breath. I didn't feel cold. I didn't feel victorious. I felt okay. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. His third call didn't come from him. It came from my younger cousin, Jenna. Her voice trembled before she even got to the point. Alana, I thought you should know. Your dad's in the hospital. It's serious. I didn't say anything at first. My fingers curled tighter around the phone, but my face stayed still. It's his heart, she continued. They don't know if he's going to make it. My stomach didn't drop. It tightened. Slow, deliberate, not from shock, but from the weight of the choice that was now mine. I hung up and stared out the window, watching the world move like nothing had changed. People walked their dogs. A kid skated by with a neon helmet. Somewhere, someone was falling in love. And here I was, holding a decision no one else could make for me. He was the one who told me not to come home. Now the question sat in my chest like a stone. Should I? And more painfully, do I want to? I didn't pack right away. I sat with it for hours, then hours turned into a full day. The idea of showing up felt both absurd and necessary. Absurd because what would I even say to the man who erased me? Necessary because maybe I needed to see for myself what remained, what didn't. So I booked the ticket, not for him, for me, not to mend anything, but to confirm that nothing needed mending anymore. The airport felt unfamiliar, like a life I had left behind and wasn't sure I should touch again. On the flight, I didn't rehearse a speech. I didn't plan any dramatic confrontations. I just sat there, staring at the seat in front of me, letting the quiet build. By the time I landed, I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared either. I was ready, not for resolution, but for clarity. I wasn't the girl who left. I wasn't the daughter who waited. I was someone else now. And she walked toward that hospital with her head up. The hospital smelled like every hospital, sterile, tired, humming with quiet urgency. I gave his name at the front desk, and they pointed me toward the cardiac unit. My steps were steady, but my chest felt like it was holding its breath. When I reached his room, the door was slightly open. I paused before pushing it wider. He looked small, smaller than I remembered, not the towering man who once made the walls shake with his silence. Just a body under a thin sheet, wires tracing his heartbeat, oxygen hissing gently beside him. He didn't see me at first. He was asleep or pretending to be. I stood there, not moving, not speaking, and for a second I wondered if this was enough. If standing there, bearing witness to his frailty, was all the closure I ever needed. I didn't rush in. I didn't hold his hand. I just watched the rise and fall of his chest and waited for the moment he'd open his eyes and see the daughter he told to stay away. His eyes opened slowly, like waking was a choice he hadn't quite committed to. When he saw me, there was no gasp, no tearful reunion, just recognition. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe guilt, passed across his face before settling into that old, familiar stillness. I didn't say hi. I didn't ask how he was. I sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at him like I was reading a page I'd already memorized. You told me not to come back, I said, voice low but steady. He didn't deny it. Just blinked slowly, like that sentence was too heavy to carry. And now I'm here. Not because you called. Because I chose to be. He swallowed hard, like he wanted to speak but didn't know how to begin. I didn't wait. I'm not here to fix anything. I'm not here for apologies. I just needed to see the man who thought silence would erase me. He looked away. I stayed. Not out of hope, but out of strength. This time, I didn't need him to see me. I already knew I was real. After a long pause, he finally spoke. His voice was raspy thin, like it had forgotten how to form something human. I thought I was protecting you, he said, eyes still fixed on the window, not me. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask what he meant, because I already knew. That was his story. Always has been. He calls it protection. I call it erasure. From what? I asked quietly. From being part of a broken family, bestie? He didn't answer, just let the silence stretch like maybe it could fill in for the truth. You gave them everything, I continued. And when I asked for crumbs, you called it drama. His fingers twitched against the blanket. Maybe from nerves, maybe from shame. But still he said nothing. You could have said my name, I added. You could have told them I mattered. He closed his eyes, and for a second, he looked more like a shadow than a man. And that was all. No apology, no redemption. Just a man lying in a bed of wires and a daughter who finally stopped waiting to be loved out loud. I stood up without drama. No hugs, no promises, no cinematic goodbye. Just the scrape of the chair against the tile and the soft click of my heels as I walked toward the door. He didn't call after me. didn't ask me to stay. And strangely, that didn't hurt like I thought it would. It felt honest. For once, there was no pretending, no illusions that we were anything but what we'd become. Two people with a shared past and a quiet, mutual understanding that not all stories get repaired. And as I stepped out into the hallway, the air felt different, lighter, like I'd been carrying the weight of his silence on my back for years. And now I'd finally set it down. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. Closure didn't come in the form of words or tears. It came from finally realizing I didn't need either. I had shown up. I had faced him. And I had walked away standing taller than when I entered. That was enough. That was mine. I didn't pack with anger. I didn't cry. I just folded my clothes one by one and placed them into the suitcase I had bought years ago. When I thought I'd be traveling for book signings and family vacations, not escape, there was no dramatic music, no thunderstorm outside the window, just quiet. The kind of quiet that seeps into your bones when something is truly ended. I looked around the apartment one last time, not to mourn, but to confirm that nothing there held me anymore. Not the photos, not the furniture, not the past. Violet had burned too many bridges for me to pretend there was anything left to save. And as I zipped the bag and picked up my keys, I realized I felt something rare, relief. I wasn't walking away because I was defeated. I was walking away because I had already won by not becoming her. I didn't plan to write it. It just came out like a breath I'd been holding for years. I opened my laptop in a coffee shop far from home, far from the whispers and the headlines, and the words poured out, not rage, not gossip. Just the truth, clean, heavy, and unshakable. I didn't name her. I didn't need to. I wrote about what it felt like to be erased by someone who once held your hand as a child. I wrote about betrayal wrapped in smiles and how silence can sometimes be the loudest scream. I wrote for the woman I used to be, the one who thought love meant shrinking to make others comfortable. I pressed publish without rereading. No hashtags, no agenda, just a raw offering to anyone who had ever been told they were too sensitive or too much. And then I closed the laptop and walked away, not to wait, just to breathe. I didn't check the post for 3 days. I thought maybe 10 people would see it, maybe none. But when I finally opened my laptop again, there were thousands of comments, some short, some pouring out like old wounds finally allowed to speak. Women, men, even teenagers, they didn't ask for drama. They didn't want revenge. They just wanted to say, me too. This felt like you wrote it for me. And I thought I was crazy until I read this. Thank you for putting it into words. I didn't reply to every message. I couldn't, but I read each one, slowly, carefully, letting them settle in the quiet corners of me that Violet once tried to bury. It was the first time in a long while I felt connected, not famous, not pitied, just seen. And in that connection, something inside me began to heal, not because the world suddenly changed, but because I wasn't alone in it anymore. So I kept writing, not for headlines, not to prove anything, just to keep breathing. Some posts were only a few lines, a memory, a question, a moment of stillness. Others were longer, spilling out like letters to my past self. I didn't stick to a schedule. I wrote when it hurt. I wrote when it hurt. I wrote when it didn't. And with each post, something shifted. My voice, once cautious and careful, grew steadier. Not louder, just clearer. I stopped editing myself for approval. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. People began sharing my words, not because I asked them to, but because they needed to. Some posts were printed out and taped to mirrors. Some were whispered in therapy rooms, some were bookmarked in silence. I didn't call myself a writer. I still don't, but the words became my anchor. They reminded me that even if Violet had tried to steal my story, she couldn't silence the voice that was mine alone. The message came on a Sunday. I almost deleted it without reading. His name alone used to make my stomach twist, but something stopped me. It was short. I know I didn't stand up for you. I was scared. I'm sorry. That was it. No excuses, no explanations. Just a sentence I had waited half my life to hear. My hands trembled. Twinna. Not with anger, but with the weight of years where I'd wished someone, anyone in that house had seen me, believed me, chosen me. I didn't reply right away. I didn't even know if I would. But I sat with it, let it settle. He had been a child too, trapped in a house that rewarded silence. Maybe we both were. And somehow that message didn't reopen the wound. It closed something. Not completely, but enough to breathe a little easier. Enough to say quietly to myself, I wasn't wrong. I just wasn't protected. I never replied to his message. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to anymore. Closure didn't come from a conversation. It came from living differently. There was a time I would have begged for more. For answers, for a family reunion, for someone to finally say, you were right. But that need had gone quiet, so I didn't want a seat at their table anymore. I had built my own, with friends who didn't flinch at my silence. Mornings that weren't haunted by old stories. With laughter that didn't ask me to shrink. Reconciliation sounds noble, but sometimes peace lives outside of it. Sometimes it means drawing the line and never crossing back. I still pass their names in old emails, in documents I can't delete, but there's no ache anymore, just a distant knowing. I survived them. I survived me, and I'm still here, not because they changed, but because I did. Some nights, I sit by the window with a cup of tea, and I watch the world move. Cars passing, porch lights flickering on, dogs barking somewhere down the street. It's quiet, and for the first time in years, the quiet doesn't scare me. It used to feel like punishment, like exile. Now it feels like choice. My life isn't loud or grand. I don't have a big family gathering for the holidays. There's no tearful reunion, no made-for-TV forgiveness. But there's peace in my routine. There's warmth in the way I take care of myself. Meals cooked slowly, books stacked beside the bed, plants that don't judge how long it took me to water them. I still remember everything. That part never leaves. But it doesn't own me. Not anymore. I'm not trying to prove anything now. I'm not chasing love I never got. I'm just living. And some days that feels like the most radical thing I've ever done. There was a time I thought my voice only mattered if someone else heard it, if it echoed in their ears, if it forced them to look back and say, we were wrong. But now I understand something deeper. My voice matters because I didn't let them erase. Because even when they tried to rewrite my story, I kept writing anyway. Not for applause, not for revenge, just so I could hear myself again. I read old journal entries sometimes, the ones I wrote with trembling hands, begging for answers that never came. I don't rip them up. I don't hide them. I let them sit there, proof that I once felt small, and chose to speak anyway. They can keep their silence. They can keep pretending nothing happened, but I will not go quiet again. I may not shout. I may not shout. I may not scream. But every day I keep breathing, healing, creating, is a sentence they couldn't silence. I no longer measure my worth by who invites me in. The doors that once slammed in my face, I stopped knocking. The rooms I used to beg to enter, I built my own instead, sunlit, quiet, filled with things that feel like me. There's no plaque on the wall. No grand audience, but there's laughter when I call a friend. There's warmth when I cook just for myself. There's music playing low while I water the plants I once forgot. This is not the life they planned for me. It's not the future they thought I deserved. It's the one I made with what they left behind. And in that, there's a kind of triumph deeper than revenge. They thought breaking me would be the end of the story. But the truth is, I was just getting started. I didn't rebuild the old life. I built one that's finally mine.